This is the question that we are facing in Ghana today. How can we stop the ongoing depreciation of the cedi? To get at the solutions to this problem, however, one would have to make an appropriate diagnosis, because a wrong diagnosis will lead to a wrong solution. The recent depreciation of the cedi has resulted in several explanations being offered from both official and non-official sources. And one cannot blame people, because people are really confused. Not too long ago, we had graduated from HIPIC. We were a low middle income country. We had accessed the international capital markets, and we had discovered oil. And we were very, very optimistic about the future. And all of a sudden, today, the picture is very different. So in our collective frustration to understand what is happening to the cedi, there has been a sudden increase in the supply of economic analysts with all sorts of theories and pontifications. Some of the explanations for the current depreciation of the cedi includes the weak economic fundamentals and the loss of confidence in the economy. Others have pointed to dollarization as the cause of the depreciation. Some have pointed to the colonial structure of our economy as the cause of it. Some have pointed to the redenomination of the cedi in 2007 as the cause of this depreciation. Others have said it is the single spine salary system which has caused the depreciation. Some have also mentioned that the current US monetary policy of the reduction in the quantitative easing has resulted in the depreciation. Now, we've had some other very interesting explanations. Some have said that the dwarfs and juju men, high-rise buildings, and even a sign of the end of the times of the world is really what is causing the depreciation of the cedi. Mr. Chairman, I will start with the explanation that relates to the weak economic fundamentals and the resulting loss of confidence in the economy as the factor explaining the recent depreciation of the cedi. When we talk about the fundamentals, we are talking about developments in the real sector of the economy, what is happening to growth, real growth in the economy, what is happening to the public finances, what is happening to the monetary sector, inflation and interest rates and so on. And then what is happening to the external sector, our balance of payments, our reserves and so on. These are the fundamentals that underpin the economy. And we want to take a look at these developments to see how they relate to the depreciation of the cedi. So I look at the real GDP growth or economic growth in this economy. Mr. Chairman, at the heart of any effort to transform the economy is accelerated and broad-based growth. If you don't have accelerated and broad-based growth, you cannot really transform the economy from where we are sitting today. The reality, however, is that real GDP growth in Ghana, notwithstanding the onset of oil production, has declined significantly since 2011. So over the last 3 years, we have been seeing a decline in real GDP growth. Data from the Ghana Statistical Service shows that real GDP growth increased from 8.4% without oil in 2008 and reached 15% in 2011. And this is where you see the peak in this graph. This basically is the result of oil production. Since 2011, however, real GDP growth has slowed down. So we went from 15% in 2011 to 7.9% in 2012. And now we are talking about a projected growth for just for 2013 of around 5% and most likely low. So, Mr. Chairman, the data for non-oil growth shows that real GDP growth has declined non-oil from 9.4% in 2011 to 3.9% at the end of 2013, non-oil. This is interesting because it means that Ghana's economy, excluding oil, is growing at the same rate as we were growing in 2000. And it is growing at half the rate that we were growing in 2008. The decline, Mr. Chairman, in the rate of real GDP growth is most noticeable in the agri sector and the industry sector. If you look at the quarterly real GDP numbers, they show that real GDP growth, if you look at this, if you look at the quarterly numbers, you'll see that real GDP growth by the third quarter was only 0.3%. You're seeing declining GDP growth from 2011 coming down, and now we've hit 0.3%. With a decline in agriculture by 3.8% and a decline in industry by 11.8%. This is the lowest quarterly growth recorded in recent history and indicates that all is not well with the economy. Mr. Chairman, in terms of quarterly GDP growth, we have really gone from unprecedented in 2011 to zero by the end of 2013. Declining economic growth is worrying because without an expanding economy, we cannot create jobs. And many of you students will find it difficult to find jobs when you complete your studies. Lower output also implies higher prices for goods. Unfortunately, the continued problems with electricity supply and load shedding would further undermine growth as businesses cut investments or close down. Mr. Chairman, when we look at price developments, inflation, as reported by the Statistical Service, has also been on the increase recently. And the talk of single-digit inflation, after a review of the inflation basket, is now history. After declining from 18.1% in 2008 to 8.6% by 2011, inflation has steadily increased to 14% by the end of February 2014. However, non-food inflation, which is affected more by the exchange rate movement, has also steadily increased and now stands at 19% at the end of February 2014. I now turn to the fiscal developments. Mr. Chairman, the recent fiscal developments indicate a deterioration in the state of Ghana's public finances, with the government unable to meet statutory payments such as the GAID Fund, the District Assembly Common Fund, the NHIS, and so on. Payments to contractors are also in arrears, and there are problems with salary payments to government workers. The situation with regards to Ghana's public finances has arisen because of a major increase in government expenditures relative to revenues in 2012 and 2013. While government tax revenue, Mr. Chairman, stayed at a constant rate relatively of 17.7% of our total income, of 17.7% of GDP between 2011 and 2013. Government revenues were relatively constant. However, government expenditures increased by 6.6% from 20.1% of GDP in 2011 to 26.7% of GDP by the end of 2013. Vice President, Academic Affairs, Vice President, Finance and Administration, Deans and Directors, Members of Parliament, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives of political parties, captains of industry, distinguished invited guests, faculty, students, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by thanking all of you who have taken time out of your busy schedules to make the journey to this beautiful and serene campus. For me, it is an honor and a privilege to be delivering my first public lecture as a visiting professor of economic governance at Central University on a topic that is literally on the minds of most Ghanaians today. What can we do about what appears to be a perpetually declining value of our currency? The Cedi. I would like to say from the outset that this subject is very much one of economics and not of politics. It is therefore important that we stick to the empirical evidence and data in reaching our conclusions. I am hoping, Mr. Chairman, that at the end of this lecture, some light will be thrown on the issue for a dispassionate and non-partisan discussion by all stakeholders that would inure to the benefit of Ghana. Mr. Chairman, notwithstanding some periods of instability, the Cedi has been persistently declining in value since independence in 1957. In fact, if figure 1 comes up, you will see from the screen that graphically the Cedi appears to be reaching for the sky. And in fact, you would see that there's apparent stability from 1957 through the 1980s is partly because of control regime that you see there and the scale of the graph. But essentially since 1957, the Cedi has been on an upward trend. At independence, the West African pound was the legal tender. The exchange rate was equivalent. We were at 52 cedis to the dollar. By 92, it was 520 to the dollar. By 2000, it was 7,047 cedis to the dollar. By 2008, we had reached 11,900 cedis, or 1.19 Ghana cedis to the dollar. And by December 2013, we were at 2.2 Ghana cedis to the dollar, or 22,000 whole cedis to the dollar. As at March 21st, we had reached 2.63, or 26,300 to the dollar. And today we are at 26,400 to the dollar as we speak. Cumulatively, Mr. Chairman, between 1965, when the Cedi was introduced and traded at 1.04, to today, the Cedi has lost 99.99% of its value against the US dollar. Mr. Chairman, this rate of depreciation of the Cedi against the US dollar in 2014 has been at an unusually fast pace. Since 2013, we've seen a very fast pace of depreciation. The cumulative depreciation of the Cedi in 2013 was 14.5%. But in just the first quarter, and we are not even quite at the end of the first quarter of 2014, the Cedi has depreciated by 16% so far. For a small open economy like Ghana, this trend is worrying because these massive depreciations in the currency end up increasing the cost of living and the cost of doing business. The exchange rate is a significant component of the pricing of utilities and petroleum products. It means that other things equal, if the exchange rate depreciates, we can all expect to pay more for utilities and petroleum products and virtually for all other goods and commodities. There is, however, an argument some economists make that exchange rate depreciation is actually good for the economy to the extent that it creates an incentive to increase exports relative to imports and thereby improves the balance of payments. Notwithstanding the massive nominal and real depreciation of the cedi over the years, however, exports have not quite increased proportionately. So it really means that the exchange rate alone may not be sufficient as a policy tool to achieve export competitiveness. Mr. Chairman, this persistent rate of depreciation of the cedi must be looked at against what is happening to other currencies in the global economy. Take, for example, the US dollar against the British pound during the same period. At the end of 1965, the pound-dollar exchange rate was $1.59 to the pound, to the pound, 1.59. From 1965, we go to 2012, and the dollar-pound rate is 1.614. So, a cumulative appreciation of about just 1.5% over a 48-year period. So you see that over 48 years, you see that the dollar has depreciated against the pound by just 1.5%. 1.5%. Now you look at what has happened between the cedi and the dollar in exactly the same period. In fact, the dollar has appreciated against the cedi by 2 million%, if you can think about that. So it's a really difficult situation that we face. The CFA franc zone countries, our neighboring countries, and the CFA franc zone like Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Mali, Togo, have also attained relative exchange rate stability, underpinned by a fixed exchange rate arrangement with the French franc and now with the euro. In fact, between 1999 and 2014 and today, the CFA franc has actually appreciated in value against the US dollar. It has gained 19% against the US dollar in this period, whereas we were losing 99% of our currency. If you look at Hong Kong, between 1983, when the Hong Kong Monetary Authority established the currency board system, between 1983 and today, the exchange rate of the Hong Kong dollar to the US dollar has been fixed at 7.83 Hong Kong dollars to the US dollar. The question we must ask ourselves, Mr. Chairman, is how come some of these economies with both fixed and floating exchange rate regimes are able to maintain such durable stability of their exchange rates whilst the cedi continuously is depreciating?